looking? Okay. But it didn't come up on your Facebook either. I think we got a hiccup back there. Oh, there it is. Now it's working. Okay. Good morning. Thank y'all for bearing with me. Technical problems, imagine that. Satan trying to trying to get in the way of the word this morning. Um, really glad to have you with us today, whether you're out there in Cyberland or whether you're here in the auditorium with us. We are glad to have James and Kimberly with us today and their family, as well as Kimberly's parents. They were up, I think, on a trip planned before the hurricane, but were luckily here during that time. And right now, things are pretty rough down there, so they're staying over a little longer. At least James is staying over a little longer up here for that. We need to remember that those families and people down in Lake Charles, they got hit pretty hard. The church there still without power, James was telling me, so they're not having services this morning in the building or anything because of power. So let's remember those people in our prayer, but we're certainly glad to have y'all with us here today, and I guess with them as well. A couple of announcements. Be sure and check the bulletin and Facebook. Judy does a good job of keeping things updated there. Leanne Hutchison's aunt, I think, is not doing real well, and so we need to remember them and Leanne as well. And, of course, with the COVID rules, you can't really go and help and comfort like we would normally do. So that's hard, especially for the family as well. This week, we're looking to finish up Joshua. Turn that down a little bit. Joshua chapter 22. We were looking at the end of the war. The big conflicts are over. The general overall control of the land belongs to Israel now. There's still a lot of people that aren't conquered, per se. There are a lot of towns that need to be taken. But the big strongholds and basically control of the land is now in the hand of the Israelites. And this is a big, exciting time for the 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan. Because, remember, their families, flocks, and loved ones, everything, are back over on the other side of the Jordan River. They agreed to cross the Jordan River and fight, which wound up taking, several years in order to accomplish all of this conquest before they went back and settled down. And so now it's over. And they're getting ready to go back across the Jordan to their family and start their lives in not necessarily the promised land, but the land that they claimed for their promise, even though it wasn't on the right side of the Jordan River. And so Joshua meets with them. And that's what chapter 22 is about, as we look at what happens to those 2.5 tribes of people as they separate themselves from the tribes of Israel. Last week we mentioned that he commended them. He told them, you did a good job. Okay, they fulfilled their promise. They remained loyal to the Lord. They remained loyal to their brothers and sisters in the other tribes, and you did a good job. So he commended them. The second thing he did was he discharged them. Your obligations are fulfilled. You can go back home now. You've done all that you said you were going to do. And so Joshua kind of gives them a little pep rally as he sends them away. But before he sends them away, he also, in addition to that pep rally, he's going to admonish them. Okay, so we're going to talk about that today. And that starts in Joshua 22:5. As he's getting ready to send them home, he says, take good care to observe the commandments and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. To love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and to cleave to him and serve him with all your heart and all your soul. Like any good commander, Joshua is concerned about the spiritual walk of his people. He has led these people through a lot of adversity, a lot of trying times, a lot of scary times, although they were victorious almost always. And yet, he continues to be concerned about their spiritual walk. They've experienced victory in Canaan because they love God and they obeyed His commandments, Joshua 1, 7 through 8. Now, they have to be just as diligent in their worship of God through a peaceful period of time as they were during the conflict. And they have to continue to obey the Lord in their worship. This was a promise that they made back at Shechem when they divided up the tribes, and half of them got on Mount Gerizim and half of them got on Mount Ebal. And they read the promises and the threats. And they echoed back and forth across that valley there these commitments to continue to worship the Lord and to obey the Lord. And so He wants to remind them of that. The motive for their obedience needs to be their love for the Lord. Okay? People do things for different motivations, And, I think a lot of people probably are baptized out of fear. They like the people on that day when Peter preached in Acts 2, and he convicted them of what they had done. They did not respond because they loved God. They responded because they were afraid of what they had done. And so out of fear, we saw them do the right thing. And then fear turns into love as we mature as Christians. And so if your motive for obedience is fear, that's good, except fear kind of gets that callousness to it. And, when you're afraid of something and you're exposed to it, maybe you're not quite as afraid of it as ever. Phobias may be an exception. If you're terrified of heights, you may never get over that, although there's a whole industry out there to help people overcome those phobias. And one of those ways that they do it is that gradual introduction of whatever you're afraid of to you. And so Joshua wants these people not to obey God because they fear God, but really because they love God. If they love Him, they will enjoy walking in His steps. And they will look forward to doing that. And it's not a burden. When you're doing something out of love, it's not a chore. It's fun. It's encouraging. It's good. And that's what He wants them to do. He stresses to them, instead of trying to serve two masters, they should cling to the Lord and serve Him alone. And I think next week we're going to talk more about that word cleave there as we continue, as Joshua in that chapter will be giving his farewell address. Let's talk back of love, okay? It is good to obey God out of love. Jesus said this is the first and greatest commandment, Matthew 22, 36 through 38. He was asked, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment." Love the Lord. If you're doing things out of love, you got that right motivation. Can you infer that if the greatest command is to love the Lord your God, then maybe the greatest sin and abomination is to not love the Lord, to hate the Lord, or to not do what He asks us to do? John 14:15, John quotes Jesus saying, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." So it is important that we keep the commandments. Joshua blesses them. This Joshua 22, 6 through 8. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. Now to the one half of the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, but to the other half, Joshua had given a possession beside their brethren in the land west of the Jordan. And when Joshua sent them away to their homes and blessed them, he said to them, "Go back to your homes with much wealth and with very many cattle, with silver, bronze, gold, and iron, and with much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers." Joshua, their general throughout the campaign, is going to send them home with a blessing. And part of that blessing is a material blessing. They did well in their conquest of the land of Canaan. They did well when they left Egypt, because the Egyptians were throwing gold and jewels and material things at them just to get them to go. Go, go, go. And so they took all of that wealth out of Egypt with them when they left. And then they poured much of it into the golden calf, which got them into trouble. So as they take over the land of Canaan, with the exception of the city of Jericho, they were able to take of the spoil. And so Joshua says, take these spoils home and share it. Hey, don't be greedy. Don't be selfish with what God has blessed you with. Share it with those who couldn't participate in the campaign. We talked at the beginning of the book when we were talking about why these 2.5 tribes stayed on the east side of the Jordan, that it really divided their commitment. Because they left their families, they left their flocks, their material things there on the wrong side of the Jordan River. And so even though the army went across to help fight, like they were supposed to and they had agreed to, the entire army didn't go because some of it had to stay back over and protect the families and things. So we saw that divided nature that they have there. And so everybody didn't get to go over into the promised land and partake of that. Everybody didn't get to pick up spoils of war. But Joshua says, don't forget those people who stayed home. Okay? Share with them the blessings that you got. That was customary. Okay? In Israel, it was one of those expectations. If people went to battle, they were expected to share the spoils with those who couldn't go. Numbers 31, 25 through 27. In 1 Samuel 30, 23 through 25. They stayed home, kept care of the flocks and the people, so they get to share. Next thing is their honest concern. Okay, so as the tribes are leaving Joshua and headed back home, in verses 9 and 10 we see, so the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned home, parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, their own land which they had possessed themselves by command of the Lord through Moses. And when they came to the region about the Jordan that lies in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of great size. So these guys are going home. They've been commended by Joshua. They've been discharged by Joshua. They've been blessed by Joshua. And now they're going home. But as they go home, they're seeing all the places that they've been through the fighting. And as they're marching along, they see this city that we conquered, and they see Ai, and they see Jericho, and they see this monument of stones, and they see that monument of stones. There's 7 monuments that have been built as they move through the land in their conquest. And they're going back where they came from, so they're seeing these things over again. And I think it's bringing back memories of what's happened over these years as they have been part of this conquest that's been going on. And as happy as they are to go home, it's not easy to say bye to people that you've been in this close contact and that camaraderie that you have when you're on a campaign with people. It's not always easy to say goodbye. And they realize they're leaving the tabernacle and the priest and that corporate worship center there at Shiloh behind them. And so they're thinking about these memorials and things as they're going home. And I think they're already starting to feel isolated because they're on the other side of the Jordan River. Remember, that was not God's plan for them to be on the other side of the Jordan River. It was theirs, and yet they're feeling that isolation. If you read Numbers 32, where Moses basically gave in to these tribes, they got there and they said, we don't want to go across the Jordan. We want to stay right here. This is our place. Remember, we got flocks and flat land, grassland. This is a great place for us. We want to stay here. We don't want to go in. And there's no record that Moses consulted God during these negotiations. He negotiated with them over the settlement. There's reason to think maybe Moses is a little worried because you remember what happened right here, basically this same place 40 years earlier? Yeah, we sent spies in, they came back, and the 10 spies said, we can't do this. And the people accepted and believed that, and God turned them around and put them back in the wilderness. Now they're here again. They're ready to go in again, and we have 2.5 tribes saying, we don't want to go in. We want to stay here. And Moses might be a little afraid history is going to repeat itself. He doesn't want God to get angry and send them all back in the wilderness for another 40 years. If I'm Moses, I can't handle that, okay? I've been there, done that. I want to burn the T-shirt. I just don't want to do that again. And so I think Moses is concerned that there's a large group of people here that don't want to go on in. And so he negotiates in order to appease them and to avoid any discouragement. He says, okay, if y'all want to stay here, that's fine. But he's going to get something out of it. You still got to come across and help the rest of it. You can't avoid your duties to your brothers and sisters by staying here. And of course, they agreed to that, and it went on. I kind of think Moses' first reaction when they approached him about that might have been the right one. You know, hindsight is 20/20, and Moses should have said, nope, this is not the promised land. You get your tail right across that river with the rest of us, and you'll get your you'll land over there. God will take care of you, and I'm sure there's somewhere over on the other side of that river that your sheep can graze. You know, but he didn't. And again, as far as we know, he didn't consult God with that compromise. And so, once again, as we saw happen with Joshua several times, failure to consult God creates problems down the road. But for whatever reason, they're there. And they're there with Moses' blessing, and Joshua's not going to go beyond that. There's no question that Canaan was God's appointed land for his people. Anything short of that is not what God wanted. And that's where these people are staying. But they based their decision based on material gain rather than their spiritual gain. So they chose to stay there. Lot did the same thing. When Abraham and Lot stood up there and Abraham said, take a pick. Lot looked out and he saw the city and material stuff and fun and people and all that. And that's where he went when he chose to go toward Sodom in Genesis 13:10. Not unusual for people to do that. In both cases, they made their decision based on sight, not faith. They decided what they saw was better than what God had promised, because that's still unseen. Only the 12 tribes have seen the promised land, and 10 of them didn't think it was that great. You know, okay, maybe it's great, but we can't do it. You know, and so they settled for what they saw rather than what they were promised. But in doing so, they divided the nation of Israel. So now we have Israel on two sides of the Jordan River. And that's a boundary. That's a separation. And in doing so, they separate themselves from the blessings of Canaan as well. They portray believers who want to live on the border. They're good people. They do the right thing, but they're really not in obedience to God. They're close, but they're not quite there. They haven't stepped over that line of obedience to put Christ on in baptism or to do what things are that it takes to obey God in Christ. And so that's what these 2.5 tribes represent if we bring them to a parallel of us today. But remember, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Right? Anything else, close doesn't count. So the fact that these 2.5 tribes are close to Canaan doesn't count. And maybe they're thinking about some of those things as they're heading home. Maybe we're really not a part of Israel because we're on the other side of the river. So you know what we need to do? All these piles of rocks and memorials are set up to remind Israel about stuff. Let's build us a pile of rocks to remind these 10 tribes over here that we're part of them too. Let's remind Israel that we're part of Israel as well. And as they talked about that, somebody must have had the great idea of, well, we shouldn't just build a pile of rocks. Let's build an altar. You know, the altar is now way off in Shiloh. And as a result of that, it's going to be a long, hard haul for anybody on this side, depending on which way you are, the east side of the Jordan River, to cross the river and get over to Shiloh to do the worship and stuff. So let's build an altar to remind them that we're part of them as well. And it might help to remind our people, too, that we're a part of them as well. This is the 8th memorial to be built since the nation of Israel first crossed the Jordan. Remember, the first one is in the middle of the river. and then there's others that have been added at different times. But we're going to see that the issue here is not that they built a memorial. Okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with building a memorial to remind them and Israel that, hey, we're brothers and sisters and we all stay together. But the fact that they built an altar is a big deal. It's going to be a big deal in the way they built that memorial of stones. If they had moved on over to the right side of the Jordan River, there would have been no memorial necessary, because they would have been where they were supposed to be. If they faithfully attended the feast in Shiloh in Jerusalem as commanded, Exodus 23:17, they honored the Lord by obeying His word and talking about God in their homes to their children all their lives as commanded in Deuteronomy 6:6-9, their children are going to know and serve God because they're going to continue to do the things that they're supposed to be. But an altar on the bank of the Jordan River is no guarantee that their children are going to remember those things. Really, on either side of the Jordan River. Today, many people display artificial means to let other people know they're God's people. How many times do we see bumper stickers and yard signs and window clings and bracelets and necklaces and T-shirts and hats that all talk about we're God's people? You know, we're God's people, and we obey God and do that. All of these things are supposed to help people know they're Christians. But it's possible that some of these things might open a window or a door for somebody to talk about. I'm not going to dispute the fact that hat you're wearing or that bumper sticker might cause somebody to say, tell me a little more about that. I see your bumper sticker that says, you know, Jesus is my pilot or whatever. Tell me a little more about that. But it doesn't happen very often. But isn't it a lot better if they ask that question because of how we act, because of our speech and our actions and our lifestyle, and the fact that they see and know that part of us is much more likely to engender an opportunity to share the Lord than a bumper sticker or a T-shirt. When we live as God wants us to live, we're salt and light. How many times is that example used in the New Testament of Christians being salt and light? When there's no salt in something, you notice it. Yeah, you may wish it was there. For years and years, Rosemary hammered me because when food hit the table, I grabbed that salt shaker and I went to salting, right? Never tasted it, never checked it. I just put salt on it. You know, now I don't get much salt. Mainly if it's not put in there by whoever cooked it, I don't get to enjoy salt. But I sure know when it's there, you know. And light's the same way. A little bit of light floods through a lot of darkness. It's obvious it's there. And that's what we need to do. So this memorial on the side of the Jordan River is not going to make the difference in whether these people are going to continue to follow God or not. We're going to look now at their humble submission. Joshua 22:11-29. What's going to happen? Let's read the verses. And the people of Israel heard say, behold, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh have built an altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. Good intention, you know, the intent was to be something positive, to remind us we're all together again. But what it's going to do is create a war. Then the people of Israel sent to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them the head of a family among the clans of Israel. So word traveled quickly. They built an altar. Have you heard? The 2.5 tribes built an altar. That's sacrilege. That's sin. God said don't build but one altar. That's ours in Shiloh. They can't do that. We're going to go get them. They were fired up. The actions of the 2.5 tribes may have been sincere, but it was clearly misunderstood. God told them to destroy all the pagan altars and not to build altars of their own. There's only to be one altar. Deuteronomy 12 and Leviticus 17, 8, and 9. God makes it clear. One altar. They've built another one. Whatever their intent, the result is division. They have divided the tribes. Now, not just physically because of the Jordan River, but we're going to have a war. We're going to have a civil war because these guys built an altar. And it's interesting that the altar was built on the side that belongs to the people of Israel, verse 11. Whether consciously or not, that statement indicates that psychologically the 10 tribes west of the Jordan have separated themselves from the 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan. They're physically separated, but now they're psychologically separated. They've just barely got their feet dry from crossing the Jordan, and they're already them instead of us. Cliff? Right. Agree. And we'll talk about that next week when we get into 23 and 24. To kind of summarize for those who couldn't hear, Cliff says that the action of these 10 tribes right here in dividing it into us and them indicates maybe why they built that altar in the first place. They knew that. That was kind of how they were feeling, and that's why they wanted to build this memorial to remind them of it, and that as in the Old Testament, God dealt with the people as a nation, in the New Testament, he's dealing with us as people and as individuals. Kind of summarize what he said there. Mr. Wayne? Yeah. Right. Mr. Wayne says we don't have any better sense than they did because right now in our country it's us and them. And we're looking for excuses to hate each other instead of opportunities to love each other. And how true that is. Well, so we have this misunderstanding now between the two groups. And the action of the 2.5 tribes is so misunderstood that the other tribes load up their weapons, which they have been using against the Canaanites, and they're ready to turn them against their brothers who had just left them maybe days ago. And they've been fighting together for years, and now they're days apart, and they're going to go fight each other. Mm-hmm. Yes, they were. They were the spearhead. So in an effort to find out what's going on, I mean, we see some wisdom here on the part of the 10 tribes. They're ready to go to war. They have mobilized the National Guard. They have everybody ready to go. But before they go marching into battle, they say, let's make sure we know what's going on. And so they send Phinehas, the son of the high priest, and 10 leaders from the tribes to go across the Jordan and find out what's going on. Smart move on their part. It's the responsibility of the tribal elders to do this. They are doing their job as a leader of the tribe. They're supposed to investigate any activity that might be a breach of the law. Deuteronomy 13. Their job to find it out, and that's what they're doing here. And just as a reminder, this is exactly what the Jews, especially the Pharisees, in the time of Christ, thought they were doing. They really thought they were fulfilling and honoring Deuteronomy 13 which was, this is possibly violation of God's law. We need to investigate it and find out whether it is or not. And so they went to Jesus and they tested Jesus and they questioned Jesus. And they ultimately concluded that he was a violation of God's law. And under Deuteronomy 13, it was take him out. Don't let him corrupt God's law. So, again, intent may have been good, even for the Pharisees in Christ's time. Doesn't mean they were right. The intent of these 2.5 tribes may have been okay, but it doesn't mean what they did was right. And so now we have the appeal, Joshua 22:15 through 20. And just for time, I'm not going to read that, but Alan, if you want to just maybe bump through that. This delegation gets over there and talks to the tribe and finds out what's done. And the result of that is, they basically say, no, we weren't trying to build an altar. We wanted to make sure that your kids didn't forget that we belong to them and cause our kids to sin. Now, that's kind of summarizing all of those verses. And so Phinehas calls what they have done a trespass in Hebrew. It's an act of treachery. Joshua had just commended them for their loyalty. And days, more than weeks later, Phinehas convicts them of treachery before God, before they really even got home. They had turned away, which meant they were no longer following the Lord. The strongest word Phinehas uses is rebel, which means deliberately resisting God's will and disobeying his law. He uses it 5 times in those 5 verses. Samuel tells Saul that rebellion is as the sin of divination. 1 Samuel 15:23. This is after he was told to go kill all the Amalekites, and he kept the best of everything and brought it back. And Samuel tells him that was rebellion. And rebellion was as bad as the sin of divination, which Saul was also guilty of. But in building an unauthorized altar, they're guilty of apostasy. They are guilty of apostasy because they built the altar. Phinehas cites recent history as a warning to the 2 tribes. First was the participation of Israel in the heathen rites of the Moabites when they committed adultery with the Moabite women. This goes back to wandering in the wilderness, Numbers chapter 25. And as a result of that adultery with those women, 25,000 people of Israel were killed. Phinehas reminds them of that. That's a serious warning, isn't it? Do you realize by building this altar, you're just as guilty as the guys who slept with these Moabite women? And God killed 25,000 people then. The second warning was the sin of Achan at Jericho. They know that one because it happened when they were there. They were alive when that happened. And Achan took the spoils that belonged to God, and his entire family was killed. You don't want to mess with God when it comes to disobedience. And Phinehas is making this clear to them. And so the logical conclusion is that if God is angry with them, we may all be punished. Because it's not always just the guilty that God punished back in those days. And Phinehas is saying, we don't want you messing up to cause us to be punished. So, in fact, they recognized that it would be better and less tempted if they had just moved over the river to Canaan. And the 10 tribes even point out, if you would you still have that chance. If you'll come on over the river and get in the promised land where God wants you to be, we will give you some of our land. Okay? Because the division has already been made. But the 10 tribes west of the Jordan are willing to give up land to the 2.5 if they will just come on over the river and rejoin us as one big, happy Israeli or Jewish family to get them to do this. It was wise. It was unselfish counsel. And the tribes should have appreciated and accepted that. Because, again, it's a redo. They had an opportunity to redo the mistake that they had made when they decided not to go into the land of Canaan with really no penalty. But they didn't. So now we have the argument, Joshua 22:21 through 29. And the accused tribes now give their defense. Okay, because Phinehas has hammered them. You know, this is apostasy. This is going to get people killed. You displease God. We can fix this. Come on over the river and join us, and we'll make this work. So now the 2.5 tribes give their defense. So we'll look first at verses 22 and 23. The mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and let Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or in breach of faith toward the Lord, spare us not today. For building an altar to turn away from following the Lord, or if we did so to offer burnt offerings or cereal offerings or peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself take vengeance. So this is where they're saying, we did not build an altar for an altar. Okay, it looks like an altar. But it's not an altar. We're not going to offer sacrifices there. If we built this to offer sacrifices, then God strike us down right now. You know, and that's kind of their defense that they're throwing out there. There's that first verse where they use the name of God 3 times. 3 fundamental names of God. El, which is the mighty one. Elohim, which is God. And Jehovah, which is the Lord. So they're saying, God, listen to us. They're appealing to God through 3 different names that the Hebrews had for God. It's a solemn oath that their intentions are pure. They're not rebellious. And they call on God that knows their hearts to testify for them, that this is not our intent. The fact that the Lord knows our hearts and we swear an oath does not guarantee that our actions are right. Okay? They may be sincere, doesn't mean they're right. All sorts of questionable actions can be shielded by saying, the Lord knows my heart. And we do hear that. We hear that by people who believe that all it takes to get to heaven is just to be a good person. You know, God knows my heart. You know, God knows my heart. God knows I'm a good person. God's going to let me come to heaven because he knows I'm a good person. Well, the 2.5 tribes are saying God knows our heart. And so we're okay. Paul's heart was totally committed to Deuteronomy 13 before he went on the road to Damascus. Nobody doubted Paul's sincerity as a defender of the Jewish faith. He was knowledgeable. He was bold, courageous, and vicious in his defense of the Old Testament law and Deuteronomy 13. His conscience was clear about that, but he was still wrong. Okay? And now we have an entire nation of people who have misinterpreted what is supposed to be a good deed, and they're ready to go to war against their brothers because of it. There must be something wrong with the deed. That's just common sense. You may not have intended it to be bad, but that was a really dumb decision if this many people have misunderstood what you intended to do. Their explanation attempts to blame everyone else. You know, this is the tribe that Joshua commended and discharged and admonished, but they have now crossed the river, and we're seeing a different side of them. Let's look at how they try to blame everybody else. Verses 24 and 25. Nay, but we did it from fear, that in time to come your children might say to our children, well, what have you got to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made Jordan a boundary between us and you. You Reubenites and Gadites, you have no portion in the Lord. So your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. The excuse for building the altar is that it was not for sacrifices. They acknowledge if that was right, they would be guilty and deserve to die. It's not that, though. It's because the descendants of the 10 tribes might forget they were kin to the descendants of the 2.5 tribes. That's why they built this. We're afraid your children, now we have this division, see, already again. We're afraid that your children will forget that we're a part of Israel. And then your children will not let our children come across the river and worship at Shiloh or at the tabernacle. The children in the land of promise are going to lead astray the children who stopped before they got there. See, it's your fault, not our fault. We're trying to protect ourselves from you, so it's your fault. History's going to show that they should be more worried about what their children are going to be doing with the children of the neighbors on their side of the river than what the children of the 10 tribes are going to be doing to them. And so, amazingly, they're also going to blame God. And we're going to start there next week. Should finish up 22 and roll into 23, 24, which go together. So if you want to look ahead and see how they blame God and